Okay, welcome everybody to the regular monthly meeting of the Needham Historical Commission for February 10th, 2025. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, meetings of public bodies may be conducted virtually, provided that adequate access is provided to the public. This meeting is held in accordance with those acts. Audience members and attendees are advised that this meeting is being recorded. All votes will be taken by roll call. Hey, welcome. We will actually do minutes in a later part, so we don't waste Jen's time. So we're gonna start with the discussion with Jen Doherty. Jen Doherty represents the Mass Historical Commission for the next several days.
Yes.
Jen, I think most of you have heard, is actually leaving. This is her last week at the MHC, and she is joining the Barrett Planning Group as a preservation planner. So good luck and we miss you. Their gate is definitely our loss. So we have two topics we want to touch on today. One is the local historic district bylaw, and the second is the demolition delay bylaw. We'll start with the local historic districts, and obviously anybody's got questions or comments should weigh in. As you know, we're still waiting on final approval for our bylaw. There's still some administrative bits and pieces to be completed, but we live in hope that that will happen soon, and we would like to start planning for it. So we would like, obviously, we would like to expand the program. We would like more local historic districts when the time becomes appropriate. And we were spending a little bit of time in previous meetings talking about sort of ways to publicize a possible reception for historic homeowners, stories in the local news. We are fortunate now to have 2 online local newspapers, so it's better than 0, which is what we did have. Neighborhood meetings, we do have one neighborhood that has already spoken to us about possibly going through this process. And then letters to historic homeowners, just ways to get people who are eligible for the program to be aware that it exists and what the general process is for pursuing it. And my first question to you is, how do other towns that approach this? What's the sell, and are there sort of good pitches that you've seen other towns, pursue to get this going, that we can start building on as ideas?
Yeah. It really kind of depends on what, the needs of the community are and what the interests are. So there are certainly some communities where they do it sort of as like a voluntary approach, and just, having property owners kind of approach the commission or approach the town about, putting a local historic district designation on their property. There are certainly then, communities that are much more proactive about it, and, looking at different neighborhoods or, different areas of town where there, might be development concerns or, just different pressures for change in the community, or, areas that are really representative of the community's history that they really want to focus on and preserve, those areas of the community. So it kind of depends. And, it ultimately is up to the local historical commission, the district commission, what the route you're going to take. Is it going to be that you're sort of proactive about designating local historic districts and really seeking out property owners or areas of town, things like that? Or are you going to be, kind of more passive about it and, just when property owners approach the commission, move forward that way? So I think that would be kind of the one big question for the commission to settle, and the district commission as well. But yeah, I think that's kind of the different routes that folks take when it comes to historic districts.
Yeah, I think for my part, I would prefer a more proactive approach. I think right now, because we have been limited by the delay in approval, we really haven't had a chance to, pitch it and let the town know. Town meeting members obviously know because they voted on it last spring. but I think the town at large, isn't yet really aware. And, you know, conversations that we had during the process, there are homeowners who have said, oh, this sounds really interesting, you know, let me know. So I think there would be people that sort of came in of their own accord who want ways to protect their houses. One of the nice things about it, from a homeowner's perspective, is though it is a longer process, it is certainly a less expensive process than something like a historic New England easement, you know, which is, you know, in the tens of thousands. So, you know, that's certainly an advantage and something that we would be able to use as a selling point. But yeah, we need to do a lot more, or will be able to do, and need to do a lot more publicity and make it more of a proactive process where we can let people know out there that it exists and that they're welcome to come talk to us about it, because at this point, I think very few people do know.
The other thing to do is if you really, if you want it to be proactive, is really making sure that it's, a tool that the town is aware of and is using, and that it's part of the larger planning process within the town in terms of, things like a master plan or just, efforts by the planning board. Just making sure that, it's incorporated kind of into those documents and processes as, hey, down the line, we would like to have more local historic districts in Needham. Here's kind of the parameters for that. Here's the commission that's in charge of that. And just making sure that, kind of the decision makers are aware of this as an option. And it's something that, the commission might be bringing forward to town meeting in the future, just so that the wider community is aware of it that way too.
Yeah, Jeff.
I mean, we as a commission don't get to bring, things to town, to town meeting.
We can if we want to.
Well,
Not easily, but there's a
Yes.
process.
of course, I mean, any citizen can put together a warrant, and I think we've done all the right steps because of your consultation. I think, all through the years, and we had a test case for our local historic district, and we, like Lori said, we educated town meeting, and then it's also the next step is, how do we educate, and get forward with something like increasing the demolition to 1 year and all that, certainly
That'll be
there's.
the next discussion.
There's, but, a big problem I think that we have is we've done things as the commission. Okay, and then we appeal to sort of, the select board, and when they're friendly to this, that, they're going through changes, and all of that. And then, as one of the select board members said to me about the planning board, that's what happens when you have an elected board. And we don't really seem to have any good input in, sort of systematizing some of this with the planning board, and that's really where it needs to be. I know other towns have, preservation staff on the planning and development board, and, Needham's probably, 40 years behind, that ball. So I don't know if you have any insight in that, because we've listened and followed your direction, and we're slow as well, but, we're swimming against somewhat of a, not against the current, but there ain't, it's not going our direction either.
Yeah. And to that point, one of the things that I always say to local commissions is just to make sure you're getting involved and, raising your hand and kind of giving your opinion. A lot of these other town boards and, staff, and they may not be aware of the commission. They may not ask your opinion. They may not realize that it's something that the historical commission is interested in. So I always encourage folks to just kind of speak up and say, hey, we're here. We want to be involved in, this, whatever it may be, whether it's a planning process or, a specific development project or, just different things that the town is doing. Just kind of making yourself a presence in the community and in the sort of town decision-making process. So that then folks then do know to come to you in the future when there are issues with historic resources. So it's sort of a larger issue of just kind of building awareness of the commission, awareness of the community's historic resources. And then it goes back to just generally things like, doing sort of public education and engagement efforts to, kind of build a constituency for the local historical commission within the community.
Yeah, I think we, to some extent, we have been in our own silo, and the local historic district bylaw and also potential changes to the demolition delay bylaw have sort of put us into this larger municipal universe, it has let us stay behind our, behind our closed door. So it's going to be, so yeah, we need to build those relationships with the building department, with the planning board, with the town manager's office, with the select board, to just sort of be on everybody's radar screen.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it's kind of related to what we were just talking about, but when you were talking, Jen, about kind of identifying parts of the town that may be of particular historic interest, especially if there's, something that, I forget what your awesome verbiage was about it being the characteristic of the town or something. Have other towns done kind of a planning effort of identifying what some of those areas are, and what are the pluses and minuses of that, especially if someone else might find kind of out of turn that that's an effort? I'm thinking of some homeowners that might not want to be involved if they find out in advance of those kind of efforts, but at the same time, that's, the mission of the commission is to identify these properties and do what we can to protect them. So just kind of wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's what we call a historic preservation plan for a community. And so that is a plan. It's similar in many ways to like a master plan that Needham likely already has. But it's based on historic resources and your historic preservation efforts in the community. And so that will often, part of that process is identifying those areas that are especially significant in the community, whether that be in terms of, architecture and, architectural integrity, or in terms of, history and culture and the development of the community and the residents that, have lived within the community. And those oftentimes historic preservation plans, kind of going through that process, the ultimate result of that is a set of recommendations, for the community to implement. And a lot of times if local historic districts are something the community is interested in, that will be a recommendation in there. And there may be certain areas that would be called out as, areas that the town should pursue designation in.
To my knowledge, we do not have a completed historic preservation plan. That was one of the products on the Heritage 3 contract that never got completed. So put that one on our to-do list.
You're certainly not alone. There's something we encourage, but they are few and far between in communities. There's certainly been a lot of more folks doing them now, which is great because it is an important piece. The other thing you might check is if Needham does have a master plan or a comprehensive plan. Under the state law, they are required to have a natural, cultural, and historic resources chapter in them. So there may be some information in there that's even just kind of can be a jumping off point for your commission of things that you might want to focus on, areas of town that might be important, things like that.
We were included in there when they ran the language by us. Remember that?
Yeah, we did pursue.
A good token. It was sort of a token little paragraph in there, and
But they're not gonna populate it for us, so that's, yeah, we, what I was referring to is we had a contract, for some more historic house research, this was now 10+ years ago. The contractor ended up bailing before the project was completed, so. That was a part of the project that didn't get done in the end, but, one that's been sort of on my radar screen for a while. Does anybody else have any questions or comments about the local historic district bylaw? process. Hey, that I would like to get onto the, ever popular demolition delay bylaw. I put this together this afternoon. Jen, I sent you a copy.
Yep.
And I've got a couple extra copies of our bylaw itself. If anybody needs them, just to look at. What I just handed out is Jen had set the MHC's model demolition delay bylaw, which I circulated to you guys last week, and I was looking at that compared to ours. And, you know, in some respects, they're very similar, and I'm sure a lot of the language of ours came from the Mass Historical Commission's model bylaw, especially, some of the later clauses about, you know, eligibility and hardship, or not eligibility, but hardship and, exceptions and processes. But the earlier half, you know, are very different in a lot of ways, and we need ultimately this is not a decision we're gonna make today, it's a decision we're gonna discuss, I would like to discuss in a fair amount of detail next month. Is, you know, do we want to make changes to our bylaw? And if we did, what is our wish list? Because if we do want to embark on that path, it is a fairly long process. We do need to, you know, start discussions with the select board and the town council. We'll have to talk to the planning board. We have to ultimately, you know, it would be a warrant to town meeting. So this would be a process that obviously it's not gonna happen this May. You know, at best, it would be next May. But if we wanted to start that process, we really need to start thinking, you know, what are the goals? What are the logistics? What is the justification? So when we go to the town boards and start this process, we actually have a clear idea of what it is we like that process to become. So I think the main difference between our bylaw and the MHC model bylaw is the model bylaw is age-based. Means any house after what he does, say, the model I think says 50, but, and I know Cambridge uses 50, which is deliberately cumbersome, but say 100 years, you know, any house over 100 years old is subject to the demolition delay. Our process, which I think most of you know something about, certainly some of us know a lot more than we care to about, and I ran a quick summary by Jen, it's much more selective. We actually go through, choose a list of houses that we think would be eligible for this process. In the last couple go-rounds, this has involved hiring a consultant because it is a labor intensive process. So the Heritage 2 and 3 projects, for example, were consultant hires to go through these properties, do the house histories, work out the neighborhood histories, and whether, you know, and ultimately bring the information to us so we could decide which of these we really wanted on the inventory, and then we would vote them onto the inventory. So it's not just age, it's architectural style, if relevant, historical significance, a number of other factors. So it's much more more subjective. It's not just an age cutoff number. The age-based bylaw is obviously simpler because all you have to know is the age of the house and you're done. Ours is more labor intensive because you do have to do all of this research. You then do have to assess it, characterize it. In our process, we also consult with the owners. Now, it's actually technically not necessary, but we don't want this to be an adversarial process. We want it to be a cooperative process. So we do go to the owners, explain, you know, what we want to do, what it means to them, what it doesn't mean. No, that doesn't mean that they can only paint their house white. You know, a lot of people think, well, we essentially take over their house. So there's a lot of public education that goes with this. So for each house, we have to go through this process. As a result, there are certain houses with certain characteristics that are indeed on the inventory and houses with the exact same characteristics that are not on the inventory. Because we can't always get agreement, we can't do the work to scoop them all up, we can't do the research to find them all. Whereas with the age-based bylaw, you know, date, you're in or you're out. The process is very clear. Our process, as I just described, is much more convoluted. The information for the building department, for realtors, for potential buyers is also very straightforward because the assessor does produce, there's a public list of this information. In the assessor's list, the house date is part of the data, so you could look something up. Right now, a builder or a realtor or a prospective buyer has to usually calls us, calls the building department, or calls the town manager's office. There is, our list is on the NHC webpage on the town's website, but most people don't know to look there or wouldn't find it there. There once was an interactive map, but that appears to have disappeared. So there are places to find it, but none of them are immediately obvious, so people do have to search around or call to get this information, whereas if it was date-based, it would be easier to find. You know, and it's automatic. But that also means that stuff goes onto the list regardless of its condition, regardless of its significance or lack of significance or historic value. Our process is more mindful when we put something on the inventory. It's usually after fairly careful consideration. So I think it's fair to say that not everything we want is on the inventory, but everything on the inventory is something we want there. When the time comes, when there is a challenge or a demolition delay hearing, we have the, why is my house on the inventory? So we have an explanation, we have information to go with. We're not just saying, well, because it's old, we have something substantive to say. And then the review process also, I think, works kind of in our favor. We have a relatively small number of these hearings, in part because we have a smaller number of properties on the inventory, age-based. Any house that, any house in that bucket comes up, and we have to have a hearing within a designated amount of time. And our timing is structured to allow us to pretty much take care of these at regular meetings. It's 21 days to respond to the building department, 45 days, to schedule the public the hearing. It does also allow for the notification process. Unless one comes up in the summer, we haven't had to call a special meeting just to have a demolition delay hearing. But with many more houses on the list, a lot of which we're not going to want to, necessarily defend. But we're gonna have to go through this process many more times, even if all we have to do is decide that we don't want to defend it and we release it, excuse me, to the building department. And I think part of the consequence of that is, unlike a more mindful process where we could say exactly why this house is on the list, we're gonna cycle through a bunch of houses that we just have to do this pro forma, no go ahead, no go ahead, no go ahead. And I think that can erode the authority of the list. You're just on there because you're on there, you're not on there for a reason. So there are checks and balances, there are pros and cons, there are things we have to think about if we want to think about making changes. So that was my quick analysis. Jen, did you see anything in that either I missed or was incorrect or needed to be elaborated?
No, but so I can, just to speak to the sample bylaw, I would look at it as sort of just kind of taking one step back from your current bylaw, and just sort of setting a different threshold for review. And that's that 50-year or whatever age base year you choose. Because when you do have that in there, then you are going through that process of deciding if something is historically significant and then deciding if something should be preferably preserved. So you're still sort of ultimately doing the work that you currently are doing through the inventory process. It's just as the buildings come up rather than in a sort of, proactive way of having to actually do inventory work. And so because of that, one of the reasons that we actually don't recommend a list-based bylaw like you currently have is because you do have to be really proactive about doing survey work and doing this inventory work, and many communities just frankly aren't. Many communities did a round of survey work in the 70s and 80s and then kind of just forgot about it from there. And so you're often missing buildings. Because you just haven't had the time, you haven't had the capacity, you haven't had the funding to do more survey work. So that's kind of our main reason of why we don't recommend a list-based bylaw like you have right now. But I would look at again the sample bylaw as just kind of taking a step back and then going through the process that you essentially go through now. And the other thing, to think about too, if you are looking at, revising the bylaw to be more of an age-based one, it's, statistics that your building commissioner should be able to pull relatively easily. How many buildings over 50 years have come up for demolition in the past 5 years? How many buildings over 100 years? So then you could kind of get an idea of what your workload might be, seeing oh yeah, it was actually only 20 buildings, or, it was 500 buildings, whatever the case may be, you can get kind of an idea of, what the numbers of buildings actually are. And so then again, to that is that, that's something, I forget if it's in the sample bylaw or not, but one thing that communities can do is you can actually have that initial determination of significance made by the commission, so the commission in a meeting, or by a designee of the commission, whether that's the chair and the vice chair. And so that can help with some of those buildings where you're like, we don't really care about this. It's in horrible condition. It's just kind of an old building. We don't need to go through the whole, meeting process of, reviewing this building. So kind of having that designee option can be helpful if you feel like it is going to be a significant increase in workload. But that the buildings that are frequently coming up for demolition aren't necessarily things that you're looking to preserve. So yeah.
Just one thing I wanted to ask you about. You said, yes, indeed, our process involves a lot of proactive work and unfortunately a fair amount of time and money, which is how the last one just completely gravelled. But how do a lot of towns handle the research? Because obviously at some point, a house comes up you've never heard of. Somebody's got to look into it. How do other towns handle that kind of research on that essentially ad hoc basis?
Yeah. So it depends. So some communities, it will just be the local commission members kind of trying to do what they can to find information on the building. Some communities have sort of a standing contract with a consultant to do research on buildings as they come up for their demolition review. So it might be that you have $5,000 a year to do, 10 inventory forms or whatever the case may be. And so then as the properties kind of come up for demolition, you have someone who is on call, and a professional who can do the research and provide you with the information that way. And then the other thing is just, for broader preservation planning efforts, just really being proactive in your survey and inventory work, and really making sure that that's in good condition, aside from the demolition delay bylaw, but using the demolition delay bylaw as a reason to kind of, move systematically through the community, making sure that you're getting things into Macris, making sure that you're doing inventory forms for the things that are significant and important for the community.
Yeah, Jeff, this question.
Yeah, the downside of our system is, it's voluntary. We can do all the research and find out, but ultimately we're like, oh, wouldn't you like to be on the list, you know, wouldn't you, you know, and it's like, so who's over there is already somewhat committed to preservation, a little bit at least, all right? And those who don't want to be a preservationist, and they can have a totally historic house, and they can say no, and okay. You know, we have to live by that, so, but the downside of the age-based, model, right, is it is labor intensive. And, but it takes the choice out of the matter, it's not voluntary, everybody, you know, we're gonna review every historic house, there's not gonna be one that's gonna get through by our process. But it is, and, you know, but it's also the tough selling point, not just for us, it increases the workload for other departments as well. You know, and resistance, and, you know, and it's the discussion and the selling point is you don't have to just sell the people who have potentially historic houses. Now you have to sell this to every single homeowner. Cause every single homeowner, you know, has an older house of 50 years is gonna have to go sweat it out in the process, is where is it gonna go? Is there a way to streamline it where the only, where some of the houses that's obvious, it's not gonna be, you know, that we're not gonna go anywhere with, in historically with it. Is there a way to streamline that doesn't get to the historic commission and they don't get a month or two delay just to have to schedule that, and they get through a department, maybe through the planning and development department, or, you know, there's a way to streamline that before those things get to us? And then and that's a way we would be able to sell it to all those people who are like, oh, just one more bureaucracy, you know, a bureaucratic step, and that's the people we're gonna have to sell, and in this day and age, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you do anything to this bylaw, I would certainly remove that voluntary component. That is very odd, to just kind of have this permitting process essentially be voluntary. Building permits, demolition permits themselves aren't voluntary. Everyone has to get one. So, if you do anything, I would certainly remove that voluntary issue. But aside from that, so that's where I said, folks will write that the initial determination of significance. In our sample bylaw, you have this basic threshold of 50 years. 50 years is kind of established preservation practice. The National Park Service uses it when evaluating properties in the National Register. It's basically considered to be enough distance in time that you can make a decision is something historically or architecturally significant. So you have that sort of basic threshold, 50 years, 51 years, you can kind of sort properties that way. The next step is then that the historical commission has to determine if the property is historically or architecturally significant. And so that can be a meeting of the commission that can, you come together and you say, hey, we have this information about the property. Here's what we know. Here's what it looks like. Is it historically or architecturally significant? But that's the point where I was saying some communities will actually say that decision can be made by the historical commission or by its designee. So that designee could be the chair, it could be the chair and the vice chair, keeping away from any quorum issues, obviously. Or it could be staff if you wanted it to be a certain staff person. Some communities that have a historic preservation planner, it can be the staff person there that's kind of making that decision.
Could it be the building inspector?
It could be the building inspector, but I think you would want some kind of check on that because you don't want to get into a situation where the building commissioner is just kind of saying that, everything is not historically significant and, nothing is suddenly coming to the historical commission.
For the planning department, or something.
Interesting if they interested in doing it, but yeah, that would be a process. So the part of the process would be considering that. How did the B forms work? For us, by the time you get to the bottom of this process, it's a relatively small number of B forms, and I can't remember. Well, I can remember the last time we conveyed one was when we moved into our new headquarters and had to alter the existing B forms for the new location and purpose. Do you do them for every house as it hits 100, or do you do it? You know, when there's some sort of review process, or, because I know, you know, we've needed them for various, you know, grants will very often ask, you know, for proof that the house is historic, so they'll ask for the Macris reference or a copy of the B form. So that you would need them, but how would you produce them at that?
I guess, so do you
For us-
mean,
For us,
do you
it's
mean
part of the
like,
consultation that we pay for if we did this, be making the B forms as sort of part of the deal, but.
yeah. Yeah, so as I said, there are some communities that have kind of built it into their demolition delay process. So for example, Winchester is one that's done it for many years at this point. And they do charge a fee for like the demolition permit generally. And then that money actually goes into a separate pot for the historical commission to use to then document resources that come up for demolition during the demolition delay process. Aside from that, you know, one of the sort of basic activities of local historical commission should be identifying and documenting historic resources, and, you know, doing inventory forms as part of a larger process of just, you know, documenting the community. And so that usually is just, you know, hiring a consultant, having them, you know, kind of work through a list of properties or an area of town, and, you know, and documenting that on inventory forms. So it's not necessarily tied to the demolition delay process. It's just a larger effort of, you know, documenting the historic resources that are within the community.
Yeah, we have those for every house on the inventory. That's part of the inventory process, but if you throw a whole bunch of, you know, sort of new properties into this hopper every year, you know, as you get a new bunch every year, a new bunch age in. That's potentially a lot of B forms.
Yeah. And two, the other thing is, you know, looking at, you know, where are the pressures in town? What are the buildings that are typically coming up for demolition? Is there, you know, are there any things that you can kind of look for to anticipate and document those resources, you know, before they come up? You know, that's also one way of kind of getting at it. And I will say, you know, communities like Winchester that document as part of their demolition delay process, they don't necessarily do every building, because yeah, there are some, like I said, some buildings that come up and they're in awful condition, you know, there's nothing that really happened there. They're just gonna go away and, you know, there's no delay. It is just what it is. So they're not necessarily doing a B form for every single building that comes up for demolition or every single building that meets their age threshold just because it meets their age threshold.
So you can go within that list and pretty much suss out the ones that you think are going to be significant. And start working on those and try and get ahead of the process a little bit.
To some degree, yes, but it's mostly just if somebody actually applies for a demolition permit, then they will do a B form, you know, in advance of that initial significance decision.
Which could be too late. Get the B form and then the house is torn down.
Well, it's part of the demolition delay process, so they will work with a consultant to get it in that sort of 30 days before they make a significance decision. So then they
Okay.
have the form to discuss and make a decision about whether the building is significant or not.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments about this process?
Jen, just in general, in your experience on an age-based bylaw, has it mostly been 50 years or 100 years? What has your experience been?
So most do go with 50 years because, like I said, that's kind of standard preservation practice. You know, again, it's sort of set by the Park Service as, you know, that distance in time. There are a couple different ones kind of across the state because, again, demolition delay, it's home rule. There's no state enabling legislation for it. It kind of is what you want it to be. That's why Needham's is so different from the sample bylaw, is so different from, you know, other communities. So kind of across the state, Brookline reviews everything. There is no age threshold in Brookline. They will just review any demolition permit, even if it's a demolition permit for a house built in 2000 or something, you know, they would review it. Some communities, have been kind of concerned about the volume, and this may be a concern for Needham, of post-war resources that are going to start coming up now that 50 years is 1975. So some communities have moved back to 75 years in hopes of kind of kicking that can down the road a little bit, although as the calendar turns 75 years, we'll start to cover most of those post-war resources. Some communities do use something like 100 years. They feel a little more comfortable with that as a distance in time. And then a version of the age-based bylaw that we also don't really recommend is picking a date. So 1900, 1930, something like that. The issue with that is that it doesn't change. 50 years changes every year, every time the calendar changes, but something like 1900 doesn't change. So you're going to get further and further away from that. You'd have to go back to town meeting to get that changed if you wanted to, as you get further away from it. The other thing is assessors' dates are not super reliable. As you get past sort of the mid-20th century, as you go further back in time, before they had building permits. So I had done some work in Medford where their demolition delay bylaw was set to 1900. And you would go through a neighborhood that was clearly all built at, the exact same time. And the assessor's dates would be 1900, 1910, 1895, 1900, 1905. Just, they were sort of just picking because they didn't have building permits. And so you're sort of arbitrarily kind of picking and choosing buildings at that point. You're losing buildings that are likely would fall into the same development period and should be considered the same as their neighbors. So we don't recommend picking sort of a hard date like that. We do recommend picking sort of an age year or a range year for those reasons. But again, it kind of varies all over the state what people end up choosing.
Anybody else have anything they want to ask? Well, we have her. Okay, Jen, you've given us a lot to think about.
I'm sure I have.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yep, and if you have any other questions in the next few days, certainly reach out and let me know.
We'll find you before Friday. And
Yes,
if we don't, good luck in the new job. Congratulations.
thank you.
Okay,
All
thanks.
right,
Thank
have a
you.
good night, y'all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So I would like to
I
start.
think I'd say a few things about what we just talked about. I didn't have any questions for Jen, but I had a couple.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I want to start talking about this in earnest
Yeah,
next week, and I'll start generating a sort of hierarchy or kind of an outline of how we, we want to think about it, what.
yeah, I mean, I just,
Yeah.
as a builder developer myself, that loves whole historic homes. The age-based, I think, is the most encompassing way to accomplish what I think this commission is trying to do.
Yeah.
But we don't want to be, having dealt with historic commissions in many towns, the red tape of it and the time of it can be punitive.
Yeah.
Financially and mentally, for that matter. But what I have experienced in other towns, once you get your approval, if there's any kind of modifications to the plan, there's administrative approval. So we go back to the chair, the vice chair, or a designee, say Marshall, for the first half of this year, you're a designee for an administrative review. So like an age base, like if we don't want to be the best way, I think, to sell it to the town, in my opinion, anything that's 75 years to 100 years is administrative review. Whether it's the chair, vice chair, or Lee is designated for September through December, Marshall's for the balance. Anything over 100 years old automatically goes to the full historic commission board for review.
Yeah.
I think that,
That makes sense.
I think
and
that's pretty fair. That streamlines a lot.
We need to
Um,
streamline it. Cause I know, Medfield does this and I think they have a 50-year, so. There are all these post-war splits. a whole neighborhood post-war split.
Then you
so
can
have
tinker
go
with it,
through.
50 to 75 administrative
Yeah, I
review,
would go-
75
I
or
would go
later.
longer. My
Yeah.
personal preference.
I think
would
it's
be
easier
longer
to sell
than
to the
50.
town.
Yeah, I think
if you
50 is
go
too
that.
short, but.
But
yeah,
then
we
you don't
could
have to go
these
through
houses
all
and
like the
just look at them
voluntary and
cycle
soliciting
through them.
people and if you're on administrative review, I mean. I guess we'll. And I guess we can all talk about what the parameters would be, like, listen, I don't wanna see this style house torn down, and it always can be in consult with the chair, be like, listen. I think it's fine, what do you think? And, maybe we just kick it, and, I mean, we're doing a job in Newton right now, we have 3 historic commission meetings, like, so if you're tearing down a house and you're building, developing a house. Like, a month, it's not. For a developer to think that they're gonna get it through in 30 days or 45 days. Between the building department, the fire department, the health department of tearing down a house and having they know historic's in there, some way, shape or form. I mean, I think it. Would be to our benefit to have an administrative review for a chunk of that, and then anything over. 75 or 100 years goes to the full board.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree, that's a good solution, because, yeah, we would need, which actually segues into our next topic. Which is talking to, the building commissioner,
mhm.
and, I did get in touch with him, and I look at our schedule, we don't have a Tuesday meeting this year.
I was looking at that too.
Yeah, I thought, we have done that, we have done this in the past, we haven't been able to slot in, a Monday meeting because of town meeting, but for some reason, we managed it, maybe because of the way town meeting versus Memorial Day and stuff fell out, the May meeting is on a Monday, not on a Tuesday this year, so there wasn't a Tuesday option. But he said, he is available in March every Tuesday morning until 1 o'clock. He's available, so, I think our best bet is just to make an appointment with him, and then whoever can go. If it's more than 3 people, we'll post it as a meeting, and then we'll just report back. Everyone else will take your questions with us and report back when we go, so, and then I think. One of the questions for him, and I'll ask him this in advance, so he'll have an answer, is. How in a given year, how many houses over 100 years old come up, as Jen suggested. We will have some idea of what kind of
Fine,
workload
Yeah.
we're gonna be taking, if it's 2 houses a year, then that's not so bad, if it's 30.
Yeah.
We got things, and even so, we need to have. A process that lets us compensate for 30, even if it is only 2. There will be years when it's more than that, and we can't just meet every week, just to get cycled through these things. So, of those March dates, I am available on the 4th and the 18th. So is anybody else available on either of those dates, have a preference?
The 18th works for me.
In person,
Yeah.
I probably might be there.
We can be there any of one of those days.
So do you want me to set it for the 18th? That work? What's a good, so like 10?
Sure, that's fine. with me.
Okay. I'll see if you can do that. And let you guys know, and then we'll, have a chance to,
I'm not sure, I'd have to check.
we'll have a chance to talk to him, and this will be one of the things that comes up. The minutes of the January meeting.
I think we
Yeah.
Did, but of course, I was reviewing them quickly and I didn't write it down. Sorry.
Hold on, I printed them out, but it helped to look at them.
Yes. Rather than scroll down my phone.
You'd have to.
Me too.
Well, I figured I could cross anything out, but.
His name appears to be spelled correctly.
Yeah, it wasn't my name, it was an actual paragraph.
Mess up.
Is someone that messed her name up other than me?
I do all that, I'm convinced it's got no E and it has a T. I said, no, I'm not gonna make this again, not gonna make this mistake again, it definitely is a T and no E.
Your name?
Well, the second part of it, my last name.
Oh, your last name, okay.
There's a T and an E in the second part of my last name.
Yeah, but I
There's
was-
neither in the first part.
Yeah, well, I was putting it in the wrong part. So. Joe's fault, I got so used to seeing it.
I know. I butchered that one thing.
I'm so sorry, everybody.
No, it's fine.
I know I saw something.
I think the ones I caught, I told you, we sent them out, right, at the time.
I think so.
Yeah, there wasn't much, it was pretty good.
I turned it over a little quick, so I'm.
Yes.
Open
no,
and
and
prepared
thank you
for-
for that, because, I did need to get a copy right away to the, CPC. So I appreciate that you got them to me the next day.
Either try it when it's fresh or.
Yeah. I want another copy once they're approved.
Yeah.
And said, well, we went through this 3 times already. I said, okay, no, I'm fine doing it. I would print out copy keep it and stuff.
There's an, this is not what I had seen before, and it's so minor and silly, but, there is a capitalization that doesn't need to be there. Sorry, I was also an English major.
Where was that?
The chair Grice showed the residents on Warren Street. If you go down 2 bullets to Mr. Davis wondered if the I is capitalized. It doesn't need to be.
I thought maybe that applies to resident. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for the like emphasis on the if, but there
I
wasn't
know.
any.
Did anybody else find anything when any changes? No good for me, or- Checking my notes.
No.
Just starts with low pitch 40 instead of this. He's sitting in something that's really good.
Figure shot.
There it is. Mr. Davis noted that the CPC reviewed the proposal, wants the HC to be satisfied that those standards are met.
And,
Like there's a missing
And?
something.
and ones?
Yes, maybe that's all it is, but
Just didn't make
it
sense.
just didn't quite make sense.
Or a semicolon, right?
Right.
I need to run it through grammar.
It was minor, but I knew there was something that just didn't read
It just
quite
didn't
right.
make sense.
That's what it was. Sorry. Okay. So
Yeah,
three.
it's just an end.
You can give my time in the line.
Yeah.
Okay, so, with those minor corrections, I would like a motion to accept the minutes of the January 13th, 2025 meeting.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
okay, I will take a roll call vote. Jeff,
Aye.
Leah,
Aye.
Zohar.
Aye.
Joe,
I,
Marshall,
Aye.
Megan. Of course.
Yes.
And chair votes aye, that's, minutes are accepted with minor corrections unanimously. I think that's everything for tonight. Lost my, here it is, lost my agenda. You're out of order. All right, so I will check back with Joe, get you guys confirmation on a date to meet. Just let me know if you can attend and then we will, set up that process. I'll send a, brief outline of sort of how we're gonna, what we need to start thinking about for the, demolition delay bylaw and, you know, bring comments, changes, et cetera, for the next meeting. I'd like to start structuring that process so that every meeting we get through, you know, some part of it. I will keep you posted on what's going on with the LHD bylaw and, prod our friends on Warren Street. To see if they want to have a meeting as well. Our next meeting is March 10th in this room at 7 o'clock. Do I hear, is there anybody have any other questions or anything they want to ask or comment on? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion so moved.
Second? Roll call, Jeff,
Aye.
Leah,
Aye.
Zohar. We'll be here all night.
Aye.
Marshall,
Aye.
say again. Chair votes yes. We're adjourned.